This video is brought to you by Babel. Stick around to hear more about the special offer they're providing to the entire upper echelon community. Alright, today, once again, we are delving into the murky world of FTX, Sam Bankman Fried, and securities fraud. I've covered the topic twice so far, but recently, as the dust settles on new information, I deliberately held off as a result of uncertainty. A lot of what we are learning right now changes very quickly, and I don't necessarily want to just parrot breaking news from other sources. In truth, I've had a number of people reach out with insider information, but by the time I properly vetted those messages or looked into the various different claims, someone else had usually broken the news themselves. Admittedly, I got pretty frustrated by this, since the people breaking news were often doing so without proper due diligence, sometimes even just posting directly to social media and then clarifying after the fact that they had no actual clue what was real, they just heard it from some random person. I probably got a little bit more agitated by this than I honestly should have, so I kind of backed off from coverage. But today I want to talk about an angle that feels quite a bit more impactful and also seems to be hovering just outside the spotlight for many different news channels. Before going further, this video is brought to you by Babel, which is genuinely the best language tool I've personally ever used. I'm not very good at learning languages. I took French for almost 10 years and picked up basically nothing. I was a kid, I didn't pay attention, excuses, but now that I'm older, I actually do want to learn another language, and Babel is very clearly working better for me when it comes to language retention and memorization. Babel is actually proven to help you start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. Focusing on usable conversations and common phrases, the lessons are designed by actual language teachers to be as effective as possible. Lessons will very quickly prepare you to have an actual real-world conversation about anything from travel to business or even relationships, and since I will be taking a trip to Europe sometime in the moderate future, I've decided to personally start learning German. I'm not very far yet, but I only just started and kind of already seem to have a better grasp of the language than years of in-person learning when I was younger. Maybe that's because it's on the computer and I have a natural affinity for digital learning, but still, the techniques they use are very effective for me. I use Babel on the computer, like I do everything, but they also have a very well-polished smartphone app that is extremely convenient. I'm guessing most people will use it there. Babel is one of the top language learning apps in the entire world, and after using it for a number of hours in advance of this promotion, I can easily see why that is. If you click the link down below, you can get 60% off your subscription and start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. Again, link down below in the description for 60% off your subscription. Big thank you to Babel for sponsoring the channel. Let's really begin. Quick rundown for context, since the entire situation is a rat's nest of lies and deception. FTX is now one of the highest profile bankruptcies in American history. How we got here, what caused it, and where it all ultimately ends is kind of up for debate, but for the moment we can see a series of interconnected decisions and actions that paint a very troubling picture. Initially, FTX founder Sam Bankman Fried played dumb. I'm sorry, I know that's a very ineloquent way of saying it, but that's honestly just what happened. SBF decided to tell the world through repeated public interviews that he simply didn't know what was happening. It was all just one big innocent misunderstanding or mistake, and he intended to make everyone whole. However, US prosecutors, driven by an unknown combination of factors, appear to have largely disregarded this, and legitimate charges have finally been handed down against him. According to an unsealed U.S. indictment, Sam Bankman Fried is being charged with multiple counts of wire fraud, multiple counts of conspiracy to launder money, as well as charges of commodity, securities, and campaign finance fraud. In total, that's well over 100 years of prison time in possible sentencing, which is fantastic, but rather than focusing on the immediate surface-level developments, I want to dig deeper into what has now happened alongside all of this. To be perfectly clear here, the story is extensive and has become effectively impossible to include everything in a single video. Not just for me, but probably for any commentator out there. FTX International and Alameda Research were effectively differentiated by name alone. Money from customers at FTX was used without any safeguards whatsoever at Alameda Research, while figures like Sam Bankman Fried, his parents, and other executives took out personal loans paid for with customer assets, bought company property, quote unquote, for themselves in their own name, and spread capital across both sides of the political aisle in America. Essentially, according to John J. Ray III, acting CEO of FTX during these bankruptcy proceedings, brought in specifically for that purpose, this is worse than Enron. Quote, "Never in my career have I seen such a complete failure in corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information as occurred here." End quote. Now, that's old news, yes, but it's also important for context because FTX is now a nexus of corruption, not only in the finance and crypto industry, but also in the world of politics. And that is the angle I would like to focus on for today. There are, of course, other interesting developments as well, such as the fact that Caroline Ellison, former CEO of Alameda Research, was recently actually physically seen in New York City, presumably testifying to law enforcement in exchange for some sort of preferential treatment. She made a deal, is what people are speculating. But for right now, I want to go back in time, establish a foundation, and then speculate on what may be in store, honestly, based on a series of connected data points that paint a very troubling picture. To explain this, we need to start with a confusing but seemingly isolated decision on November 10th of 2022. November 10th was, for the most part, a day of wild speculation. At such an early stage of catastrophe, no one really knew what was actually happening. Rumors and conspiracies went viral, misinformation and flat-out guesses were being spread with no remorse or regard for the truth as a way to farm social media engagement. But as the whirlwind of speculation reached a peak or a crescendo, something happened. FTX International, on its official social media page, said the following, quote, "Per our Bahamian HQ's regulation and regulators, we have begun to facilitate withdrawals of Bahamian funds. As such, you may have seen some withdrawals processed by FTX recently as we complied with the regulators." End quote. That's interesting because clarified by the actual Bahamian SEC, they have ordered no such action. Think about that, and I do sincerely believe that this is one of the most overlooked threads of the entire FTX disaster in and of itself. FTX opens withdrawals for Bahamian citizens while directly lying to the world as to the cause. Why is that? Well, to further understand, we now need to remember that during the course of these chaotic revelations, something else also happened. In the very early stages of bankruptcy, a sort of dark finance battle began to take place between an unknown hacker, this is some speculation as well, draining funds from FTX, and the Bahamian regulators themselves, who eventually seized control of a portion of assets. The details of this are somewhat nebulous. No one actually has the full story. It's an ongoing situation. And personally, I'm not as qualified to discuss that particular angle today. But the important thing to remember is that there was a battle over funds taking place, and that FTX was openly lying, brazenly, I might add, about why they had chosen to open withdrawals, specifically in only the Bahamas. So why does it matter? It matters because during an interview with Tiffany Fong, as Sam went on this ridiculous media tour, honestly acting more like a celebrity who just dropped a new mixtape than a financial criminal who had stolen billions, while most interviewers simply fawned over him and used the exposure for social media growth in a selfish way, during one of the rare interviews where someone asked a decent fucking question, shout out to Tiffany Fong in that regard here, Sam said the following.
Withdrawals were opened first to citizens of Antigua or Bahamas, yes.
Bahamas.
Yes, and then the regulators or securities said that that was not approved.
Yeah, I might have taken, I think, the right decision.
Wait, sorry?
It was, all right, so I ran it, I gave them a heads up, a one-day heads up that we were going to do it. They didn't say yes or no. They didn't respond, and then we did it. The reason I did it was critical to the exchange being able to have a future, because that's where I am right now. And you do not want to be in the country with a lot of angry people in it. And you do not want your company to be incorporated in a country with a lot of angry people in it. And so it was, realistically speaking, it's shitty. But the pathway forward for FTX involved Bahamians not being pissed at it.
Now, let's be clear. The assertion by FTX officially was that the Bahamian regulators had directed them to open withdrawals. But now, Sam was saying that it was, quote, critical to the exchange being able to have a future because that's where I am right now. And you do not want to be in a country with a lot of angry people in it. And you don't want your company to be incorporated in a country with a lot of angry people in it, end quote. This really is, in my opinion, the most intriguing part of the entire story. Sam Bankman Fried, as we now know, was operating something like a $30 to $40 billion crypto empire out of the Bahamas, and yet their accounting department was using Slack and QuickBooks.
This one is unusual, and it's unusual in the sense that literally, there's no record keeping whatsoever. It's in the absence of record keeping. Employees would communicate, invoicing and expenses on Slack, which is, essentially a way of communicating for chat rooms. They use QuickBooks, a multi-billion-dollar company using QuickBooks. QuickBooks. Nothing against QuickBooks, very nice tool, just not for a multi-billion-dollar company.
According to John J. Ray III, current CEO of FTX, in his Senate testimony, which I believe occurred yesterday and Sam Bankman Fried was supposed to be there until he was arrested, but more on that later on, this is unprecedented and bizarre. The level of accounting failure here is apparently historic, and all of this was happening in the Bahamas, which is widely regarded as a country that is, quote, struggling with corruption in its government. According to the 2022 Investment Climate Statement from the U.S. Department of State, the Bahamas now struggles with a variety of problems, including campaign finance reform, corruption, and bribery. What's more, over the past several years, there have been a number of corruption charges handed down that have all either ended in acquittals or been dismissed, with several high-profile resignations in tow after allegations of corruption broke, but were never actually fully pursued. These include the Deputy Prime Minister as well as the Minister of Financial Services in 2020. Now, keep in mind, this is a time frame where FTX was operational, growing, and presumably circumventing finance law in Hong Kong, later moving officially and incorporating in the Bahamas, ending with a $30+ billion empire built on nothing but lies. Here's where things really get interesting. Less than a day before SBF was set to appear in front of a Senate committee in the United States, he was officially arrested in the Bahamas, supposedly at the behest of the United States. On the surface, that's nothing major, but what happened afterward is far more important. Once arrested, Sam Bankman Fried was denied bail, leading him to be housed, for an unknown period of time right now, in the Fox Hill, Bahamas Penitentiary. Far from a simple detail, Fox Hill is actually a very important name here, because Fox Hill is largely regarded as one of the worst prisons on Earth. Now, to be clear, I don't have sympathy for him right now. This isn't me wringing my hands about how his treatment is unfair or inhumane. That's just flat out not my concern. But what is my concern is the potential reality we see when connecting all of these dots. According to coverage in 2019, Fox Hill was, quote, not fit for humanity. The cells were, at the time, crowded by sometimes twice as many inmates as they were designed to hold. The entire living barracks is infested with rats, and the prisoners are made to use buckets as toilets in an environment where rape is so prominent that the prison has its own isolated and untreated AIDS epidemic. I can't actually read the majority of first-hand accounts here because the video would be removed from YouTube, but suffice it to say, this particular prison, as of 2019, was one of the worst places on the planet. Thing is, that hasn't changed. According to testimony in 2021, the prison had gotten worse, not better, and now there was a serious problem with inmates' health as they were subjected to savage beatings but never treated. Again, I can't read this stuff verbatim or the video would be in violation of YouTube's community guidelines. It's that bad. So yeah, I'll link sources down below, but I won't go into too much detail right now. The most jarring information I could find when researching this came from Amnesty International in 2003, admittedly a very long time ago, but still probably relevant today, where accounts detailed that prisoners were sometimes left to die in cells, despite known medical conditions, and most importantly, that there was, quote, serious concern around a lack of transparency in the investigation of deaths in custody, end quote. This matters for one key reason. Sam Bankman Fried, operating a massive crypto business empire in a country that struggles with political corruption, is now being held in a prison where uninvestigated deaths in custody are normalized. Before being taken to that prison, he specifically lied about regulation requirements in order to try and pay Bahamian citizens out of fear, and now resides in a corrupt Bahamian prison after stealing billions of dollars and being brought up on money laundering charges by the United States. Remember, Sam Bankman-Fried donated tens of millions of dollars to United States politicians attempting to control regulation and policy. In the same Voice interview as previously mentioned with Tiffany Fong, he also claimed to have given dark money as well to Republicans simply because of the political climate in US media, which, if true, made him probably the biggest political donor in American politics during the most recent cycle.
I donated to both parties. I donated about the same amount to both parties this year. That was not generally known because despite Citizens United being literally the highest profile Supreme Court case of the decade and the thing everyone talks about when they talk about campaign finance, for some reason, in practice, no one can possibly fathom the idea that someone in practice actually gave dark. So, I don't know, all my Republican donations were dark. People won't see them. And the reason was not for regulatory reasons. It's because reporters freak the fuck out if you donate to a Republican. They're all super liberal and didn't want to have that fight. So I just made all the Republican ones dark. But I was, whatever, second or third biggest Republican donor this year as well. But also, it's all for the primaries. They didn't give anything to general elections. They don't give a shit about general elections. It's not what matters. Like, it's the primaries where you have good candidates against bad candidates.
Do we honestly believe that someone like that, operating a company worth tens of billions of dollars, which is now alleged to have committed multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and campaign finance fraud, was not engaging in similar behavior within the politically corrupt jurisdiction that the company itself was incorporated under? Is that even really a question? Full picture, Sam Bankman Fried was extremely prolific with donations. He was brazenly open to the idea of buying political influence. His company existed in a corrupt jurisdiction, and when the world came crashing down, he was caught lying about motivation as he panicked, trying to pay out someone in the Bahamas because, quote, you do not want to be in a country with a lot of angry people in it, and you don't want your company to be incorporated in a country with a lot of angry people in it, end quote. Soon after, he is arrested, denied bail, and remanded to custody in one of the worst prisons on Earth where unexplained or uninvestigated deaths seem to be rather common. My guess, and keep in mind this is 100% speculation on my part, it's very possible that he is on the schedule to get Epsteined. Whether by function of his influence peddling in the Bahamas or the United States, I have no idea. Further revelations show that the Bahamas directly endeavored to gain access to as much of FTX's existing assets as possible, even after the company had declared Chapter 11 in the United States. There is a battle going on right now between wealthy people or entities or something, maybe even sovereign governments, to recoup as much lost capital as possible. And Sam Bankman Fried, he's caught right in the middle of it. When billions of dollars are at stake, the rules of the game, the ones that you and I play by, completely change. Spurred by some outside force, presumably fear, SBF attempted to appease someone in the Bahamas or some group of people who wanted their money back. And now he's in a corrupt prison under that same corrupt governmental jurisdiction without bail. In the span of roughly 1 month, Sam Bankman Fried has gone from crypto poster child and political wonderkind to the shadow version of death row. Maybe it all works out for him. Maybe he comes home, serves a little bit of prison time, and then gets released, but similar to one of those connect the dots style children's books, when you've drawn enough lines to see the picture, you can't go back. Basically, the bell cannot be unrung. Sam Bankman Fried has made enemies, and my guess is that those enemies are currently circling him, attempting to ensure that he never speaks. Not to law enforcement, not to the media, not to anyone really, ever again in his rapidly shortening lifespan. I could be wrong, but when looking at the entire situation like a puzzle, the pieces fit. And it seems to me that someone, somewhere, has decided that the innocent act has failed, and it's time for damage control. Call it conspiracy, that's fine, time will tell, but sometimes it's fun to look at things and try to piece together some kind of hidden narrative behind the curtain. That's it though. If you want to support, there are links down below, primarily locals and Patreon for a monthly subscription, also merch, social media, and the video sponsor, of course, link down below again, but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.